To quote Thomas Jefferson, a well-informed citizenry is the best defense against tyranny. Welcome to the Constitution Solution, one podcast under God, where we discuss the basics of our constitutional republic and how our freedoms are being seized by public officials, both elected and unelected. I'm Mark DeLuzio, a former candidate for the U.S. Congress and a Gold Star father. Join me as we learn together how we can save this unique experiment that we call America. Hi, Mark DeLuzio, episode 52. I'm going to talk. This title, this episode is called "The Illiterate American," and I don't mean to insult anybody, but the illiterate American, how our public education system should be reformed to create a more perfect union. Now, a lot of controversy over President Trump getting rid of the Department of Education, which was started back in, I think, was it 1972 with Jimmy Carter? And if you look at the Constitution, the Department of Education at the federal level is definitely not constitutional. Okay, the federal government should not be involved in education. That's a states' rights issue and a local issue as well. So I think we all know that our education systems have failed us over the last few decades, and that we are basically failing in our standing in the world. And our test scores, our literacy rates, our math skills are declining. And just to give you, probably everybody out there has already encountered somebody who couldn't count change. I know change is starting to be a thing of the past, right? And, you know, we have these cash registers that calculate the change for you. But Lord, help the person when you said, hey, by the way, here's an extra quarter so I don't get all the change. And they don't know what to do with it. Okay. I've had that happen many times to me. Matter of fact, one time it was at a McDonald's and the girl kind of messed up the change because I said, hey, by the way, here's a nickel so I don't have to get all that change. And she didn't know what to do. And she gave me drastically back the wrong amount of change. So she said, let me get my boss. And so her boss came over and he worked it all out and he ripped me off more than she did. Okay. But I didn't want to embarrass him in front of her. And I said, thank you. I took my licking and I left. Okay. So my hamburger cost me a little bit more money that day. I didn't want to embarrass him in front of her, but both of them were totally incompetent when it came to basic math. My wife taught college after she retired from high school, being a high school teacher. And she was teaching computers, and in this case, she was teaching Excel, and she was teaching the percentage formula. Well, it wasn't that the kids didn't understand how to do the formula in Excel. They had no godly idea what a percentage was at all. So, kind of a moot point to teach somebody how to use a percentage formula in Excel when, in fact, they don't know what a percentage is. Matter of fact, she said to them, if you bought a pair of sneakers for $100 and there was 6% sales tax and it came out to $6,000, what would you do? And one of the girls in the class said, well, if the computer says it's $6,000, it's $6,000. This is where we are, people. Okay. And I'm sure we've all experienced this. And I don't think it's a one-off type of thing. I see it a lot. I can go on and on with more and more stories. Uh, a relative of mine graduated high school, did not know the difference between the European Union and the United Kingdom. Okay. Thought they were the same thing, and so forth and so on. One clerk at Dunkin' Donuts, I wanted a third of my coffee with milk. I don't like hot coffee. And she said, I'm not very good with fractions. Is that greater or less than a half? So this is what we got here. Now, in the town I came from in Connecticut, Glastonbury, Connecticut, where my kids went to school, matter of fact, where Laura Ingram went to school at Glastonbury High School, 70% of the kids make the honor roll. I can't believe they're all that brilliant, and I can't believe the teachers are all that great. Okay. 70% of the kids make the honor roll. Now, I'm not trying to down the kids that make the honor roll. When I was going to school, it was more like 15 or 20% of the kids made the honor roll. Okay. So I don't know how everybody became so brilliant all of a sudden, but this is what's going on today. Okay. Now, why am I talking about education? Because I want to give you my view anyway, and it's just my view on what I think a curriculum needs to look like. Now, look, I'm not a curriculum director, and I'm not about here to, construct um, classes in terms of what the foundation core subjects are going to be and all that. But I want to talk about the concept of education in terms of my view. I also want to talk about the elements of what I think should be taught. Okay, now let's go back for a minute to the Communist Manifesto. Karl Marx, one of the 10 planks within the Communist Manifesto, was education. Okay. And basically, when you read through all the garbage and all the rhetoric that he wrote about, he and Frederick Engels, and you go on and look what Lenin did and what have you, they want to control your kids' education. It's a way for them to control the means. And I think one of them said that, give me 4 years with your kids and they'll never change their mind. Okay. I think that was Lenin. All right. But the bottom line is they thought education was a product of the ruling class and that once it became part of the state, it was going to be better. Right. And yeah, good luck with that. Right. But when you cut through all the crap, the Marxist agenda on education is they want to be able to control what you know, and they also want to teach you what to think, not how to think. And I think, quite frankly, education in America has gotten to be more of a, hey, we're going to teach you what to think, not how to think. I debate college kids. God bless Charlie Kirk. He passed away just a day or so ago, and he was the best debater with college kids. But these kids are programmed. The kids that I've talked to who are going to colleges today are programmed. They don't have an original thought of their own. They're being told what to say and what to think. And once you ask them a couple of questions past the rhetoric that they've been programmed to parrot, okay, they have no basis, no argument, no understanding of anything that they think they have a command of. Okay. So our education system is failing us in a lot of different ways at the public education level and at the college level. Okay. So let me give you my view on what I think the purpose of education should be. Okay. I think we need to develop our children into involved, informed, and responsible citizens. That's it. With independence from relying on the government. Marxists don't like that. Marxists do not like that. Most people in politics today want you to be dependent on the government. A majority of our federal budget is transfer payments taken from one person and given it to another. Now think about that. When the government takes from one and gives your money to somebody else, they own you both. Don't ever forget this is about control. Okay. So, developing children into involved, responsible, informed citizens. To me, that's the key, right? And no reliance on government. Now, with that, what are the things that Mark DeLuzio thinks should be taught? And when I say should be taught, taught for meaning, not taught for, geez, I remember the Constitution was signed in 1787. Great thing to know, okay? Nothing wrong with knowing that date. But what went into signing the Constitution? What were some of the fights they had? What were some of the arguments? Why do we end up with the Bill of Rights? How many of these 70% of these kids that made the honor roll in Glastonbury, Connecticut could be able to tell you the three branches of government or give an example of a check and balance? or define the difference between a republic and a democracy. I'll bet you very little. Matter of fact, one of the high school teachers up there, um, well, I can't say he was a Glastonbury high school teacher, but he was a high school teacher in Connecticut that argued with me that he was a history teacher, that a democracy and a republic are exactly the same thing. The guy teaching history, teaching this to the kids. Now, he probably got taught that too. So, you got to go back a couple generations to find out, well, how did he get so corrupted in his thinking, right? So, here's my curriculum. First of all, this whole concept of civics, which involved, first of all, the U.S. Constitution, the difference between a representative and a democracy, a representative form of government. Why is that so special? Okay, who can articulate that? I think they need a full course on the Declaration of Independence and what led into the Declaration of Independence, including the Stamp Act and everything else that went along. Okay. What are the founding principles of the U.S. Constitution? What are the founding principles? What are the nature of rights, enumerated rights, unalienable rights, unenumerated rights? Okay. These these are important things to know. When somebody says, well, I have a right to health care. No, you don't. Because what you're saying is you have a right to my money. You don't have a right to my money. I have a right for public education. I have a right to get educated. Oh, you have a right to get educated, but you don't have a right for me to pay for it. And that's the problem. Now, at least at the federal level, all right? Influential literature that went into the founders' thinking, like Plato's Republic, Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, The Invisible Hand, right? John Locke. Some of these key writings that really informed the founding fathers. What's the difference between federal rights and state rights? What's that fine line called out by the 10th Amendment that says, here's what the federal government can do and here's what the states could do, or the people, if the states don't do their job? Another document, Common Sense by Thomas Paine. Everybody should read it. That is where the founders got their whole idea about a republic. Okay, Common Sense. I think we need another document now called Common Sense 2. All right. And I also think they should read the Communist Manifesto. I absolutely do. It's not a big book. It's only a few pages. It'll take you about an hour to read, but they should study it and understand the difference between capitalism, communism, socialism, fascism, and all the isms, right? They need to understand the difference because we throw these terms around today like they're nothing, like everybody knows what they are. Most cannot define the difference between socialism and communism. And I always say that socialism is the JV team for communism. But we don't have a good understanding of how special our our uh, our country is. The Electoral College is is genius. People say, "Well, that's not fair. People who get the most votes should win." No, we're a representative republic. We're not a democracy. We're not mob rule. And this is where we lose it. So easy to default to these arguments. Don't you think if somebody got more votes, they should win? Who's not going to say yes to that? But if you really understand what the founders did, and I'm going to have a whole nother episode on the Electoral College, okay? I won't take time to go through that now. It's easy to brainwash these kids. It's so easy to brainwash these kids. Now, we got to make sure we're teaching this stuff in the right context, too. Okay? We can't just go out and keep, you know, claiming that Lincoln had slaves and that the three-fifths rule in the Constitution was because the founders thought that slaves were less than a human being. That's how it's being taught today. And that's not correct. It's inaccurate. I also think We should have very good education on personal finance. I just got through telling you about how kids today can't count change. Personal finance, all right? It's kind of a big deal. And I think if we are able to take care of our own finances in a better way, again, we'll have less reliance on the government. And look, I know some of these courses are offered in college today, in high school curriculums today, but they're most of these I'm talking about are probably electives, or they're not really the core of what's going on. So personal finance, we definitely need education on critical thinking skills, logic and deductive reasoning. Critical thinking is missing, and you can learn to be a critical thinker. Or you could sit back and take the lazy route and just accept everything that people tell you and believe that it's true. Right along with that is statistics. Statistics need to be taught to everyone. And I'm not talking real sophisticated statistics, just basic statistics and the law of probability. It helps us understand from a logic perspective when we read an article, somebody writes an editorial, right? I was just with a friend not too long ago, and I posed this question to him. I said, "Hey, look, if you're at a roulette wheel at a casino and black comes up 5 times, what would you do?" "Oh, I definitely put it on red because red is due." "No," I said, "black has an equal opportunity to come up on the next spin of that wheel as does red." "No, that's not true because black came up 5 times." So we don't understand. Now I said, "Look, hey, you're right if the wheel is malfunctioning and it always defaults to black, but that's not what I'm talking about here, okay? And you know the wheel's not malfunctioning." So this probability statistics understanding, the fact that these kids didn't know what a percentage was. So if I said to you, 70% of the voters think X, Y, and Z, they wouldn't even know what that means. 70%. That's a big number, right? Nobody would know what that means. Or, President Trump's approval rating is 55%, which I think it is now anyway. They may look at this like, geez, when I got a 55 in my test in school, I, I got an F. Or maybe not, the kids in Glastonbury get a B. I don't know. But anyway, uh, so, if you don't know the basics and the fundamentals, how the heck are you going to get by in this world? People will lie to you and you won't even know it. Okay. So statistics are a big deal. Along with this, and this all ties together, is economics, macro and micro. The law of supply and demand. What really is the definition of inflation? I talk about this on a various number of episodes. Most people can't really define inflation. Those prices went up. I had another friend that said, "Yeah, gas prices went up because of Putin and the war in Ukraine." Is that what Biden told you? Is that what CNN told you? That's not why gas prices went up. It's a simple question of supply and demand. When Biden cut the Keystone Pipeline, took away federal permits to frack on federal land, and basically turned us into a net importer, that Trump had us as a net exporter of oil and gas, our prices went up. And when Biden went to OPEC and asked for a deal, they told him to go screw. Why would they why would they give him a deal? Okay. So now that's a national security issue. But they didn't understand why the price of gas went up. They don't understand what real inflation is. Here's that lousy percentage again. They don't understand interest rates and the Federal Reserve and how the Federal Reserve controls our money supply and how that's unconstitutional. U.S. history, the true, the true understanding of U.S. history, anywhere from slavery to the Revolutionary War to the Civil War to all the other wars, most of which were unconstitutional. Okay, understanding what really makes this country work. And this is not about memorizing facts, okay? I was always one that wanted to learn why. So if you told me Hartford, Connecticut was the capital of Hartford was the capital of Connecticut, I would want to know why. Why is Hartford the capital of Connecticut? Once I understood that, guess what? I never had to remember it was Hartford. It was easy, right? So, so along with that, world history. There is a movement on the left to suppress our history. Our history is important to understand. You see it right now. There's a misconstrued understanding of the whole Israeli Palestinian thing. Nobody seems to understand history at all. Uh, Never mind, U.S. history, but world history, right? Why did we get into Vietnam? Why shouldn't we have gotten into Vietnam? If we try to erase history, we are going to be easily controlled as a society because there will be people who want to control you. And this is why the left wants to take down our statues, rename our military bases, and take away the history that made us, good or bad. We've got to have an understanding of history. I talked about the comparative government forms, communism, socialism, fascism, capitalism. I saw a man on the street thing. It was at a college where kids were in their graduation robes graduating business school, and the commentator asked one of the graduating students to define capitalism, and the kid couldn't do it. He was actually stuck. It wasn't like he got the answer wrong. He didn't know what to say. He didn't know even how to formulate a response. And this is a kid that graduated business school. I don't know what to tell you. Ethics and morality need to be taught. It needs to be taught from a number of perspectives, but it needs to be taught from the respect that our government does not work without ethics and morality. I mean, I think John Adams said that the Constitution is for uh, a religious people, a religious and moral people. It doesn't work when you got a bunch of crooks running the show. And as much as we put the checks and balances in place, we have found ways to get around these checks and balances that our founding fathers gave us to be able to cheat. I think you see what's going on now with Doge and all the government's one big money laundering operation right now. Andy Biggs, our congressman from Arizona, who's now running for Arizona governor, and I hope he makes it, uh, told us that 90% of the people in Washington today are out making money on their own. They're there for themselves. They're not there for the American people. And I'm talking about the bureaucrats that are unelected in these agencies, most of which are unconstitutional, and also public officials that are elected or appointed. And so, when you start thinking about the form of government and what these agencies are and how they operate and how the president can write regulations through these agencies that have the power of law, which definitely overrides Congress's ability to write law. This is what the kids need to learn. Theology, just society and culture, okay? And last but not least, writing and speaking skills. Dr. Jordan B. Peterson said that if you want to become a good speaker, write out your thoughts. Because when you write, you have to be a lot clearer than me sitting here talking to you and saying, do you know what I mean? Let me put it this way. All right, let me explain it this way. And you got it. You kind of know what I mean. You can't write that stuff, right? So if you can write out your thoughts so that it's clear to the person receiving that message, you're going to be a better speaker. You're going to be more articulate, all right? And I think we all can get better at that. Along with this, we need to integrate technology. Oh, no kidding, Mark, right? Right now, technology sometimes is taught as a separate stream, separate course. You know, I think technology needs some maybe need some basic courses in technology, like how to use basic, Microsoft Office type products and stuff like that. But technology integrated into all of these courses so that it becomes one with how we do things. There are people that have graduated school that have no idea how to use a computer, even the most basic parts of a computer. Okay. So we should integrate technology. Um, I still think we need some of the basic courses: science, math, English, foreign language. But with math, let's teach what is needed. Now, maybe I'm an exception. I don't think I am. I have 3 business degrees. I've taken calculus, quantitative analysis. I've taken trigonometry, a bunch of statistics courses, which were helpful, by the way. But I never use any of those courses. I'm talking about calculus, trig, all that stuff. Never use it, but I got taught that. I also got that taught in high school. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm not saying that calculus is a bad thing, but let's make these courses more electives as needed, as opposed to jam them down everybody's throat when we're missing the basic things like the U.S. Constitution and statistics. I think statistics should be mandated. Okay. And then comes, and again, look, I'm not an education expert. My wife's a professional teacher, and I discussed this with her, and we had some pretty good conversations. But I've been in school, so I know something about it. It's not something that I'm totally, ignorant of. But I don't think I do know I've developed training materials and had my people develop training materials in business, and I've learned there are several types of learning styles. I know there's 7 or 8 different types of I can't recite them all, but there's quite a few learning styles. Some people learn by watching a video and listening, some by reading, some by doing. There's all kinds of different learning styles. But we group kids into a classroom with no concept as to what their learning styles are and expect them to learn based on the learning style the teacher chooses for that particular class. Now, I know teachers break kids out into groups and they have group activities and they have this and they have that, but we're not really optimizing on how people learn. If the goal is to get them to learn, then why am I teaching somebody who can only learn through Audible? Why am I making them read? I'm not saying we shouldn't make people read either. You got to be good readers, okay? But how many people do you know, and you may be one of them, that says, "Geez, I read that whole book and I have no idea what it told me." Okay, I'm not a good reader myself. I'm just not a good reader. I fall asleep in 3 pages, but I am great at watching a video and learning that way. Now, my wife's the opposite. She can't recall when she watches a video as well as I can, but man, when she reads something, she knows what's going on. Okay, so we all have different learning styles, right? That's one way to think about how we teach our kids. And this whole business about having these young kids sit in a classroom and listening to a teacher for 8 hours a day and expect that to work? No, it's not going to work. Should we group the kids by age? You may say, well, Mark, we're already doing that. Not really. My wife and I are only 40 days apart. I started a year later. My mother held my sister and I back 1 year, and I had a huge advantage because, 1 year when you're 8 years old, 1 year difference is a real big deal. It's not a big deal when you're 50. That's only 1/50th of your lifetime, okay? But when you're 8 years old and you're 1/8, you're that far further ahead maturity wise than the rest of the kids in the class. So should we group kids by age relative to their actual birth date, within a range, I would say, not based on a 12-month swing? Because if you're at the lower end of that 12 months and somebody else at the higher end, there's a huge difference when you're that young. So I think age has a lot to do with it. It even has a lot to do with in sports. And then another way to think about it, and maybe it's a combination of all these things, I don't know. And this one here is going to be verboten, I know, because we already know that IQ is very controversial. Even though IQ tests are perhaps the most reliable tests in the whole world of psychology, the whole IQ discussion is a time bomb, a ticking time bomb. When the book The Bell Curve came out years ago, and I read the whole darn book, I remember, and there was one little part of that book that took all the heat. The authors at the time did a study, and they looked at IQ by race, and they found that Asians as a whole had higher IQs than any other ethnic group. Next was Caucasians, and last were blacks. And it was a big difference, by the way. It was not a small difference. And those guys got called racist. They got called this. They got called that. So I can't see how you could take somebody with 130 IQ and somebody with a 95 IQ and put them in the same class, and somebody's going to get screwed. Probably the guy at the 130 level, because you're going to teach down to the lowest common denominator or somewhere in the middle. So, but to even think about IQ, and they say, well, IQ tests are racist and they're culturally based, biased, and all that. No, they're not. Not the ones that have all visual pictures, no words, no interpretation. They're not, okay? And the IQ guys have already figured all this out. The argument is a poor argument. It's a low resolution argument. They figured all these biases out of these tests. It is the most reliable test out there today. So so grouping by IQ to me makes a lot of sense. And maybe that's where age maybe doesn't matter. I don't know. At least from an academic perspective, maybe not from a social perspective. But you think about it. If you're in the upper echelon of intelligence and you're stuck with a bunch of 100 IQ people, you're not going to learn. Matter of fact, my wife says if you're smart and you have some conscientiousness, you don't need a teacher. You can learn on your own, she says. I don't know if I agree with that or not, but that's her opinion. She's a professional teacher. And to some degree, I'm very intellectual, and which doesn't mean I'm smart. It means that I am interested in a lot of different things, and I like to learn. So, if you and my grandson's like that, loves to learn. So, if you have that drive to be intellectual, then yeah, you could probably, learn on your own. Charlie Kirk, God rest his soul, was a big intellect. Never went to college. Or if he did, he dropped out in his first semester, I think. But he was very intellectual, and he knew more than the professors did about U.S. history, about the Constitution, about politics, about culture, about literature. He didn't need to go to college. Okay. So well, I'm not down in college, by the way. Okay. I'm not one of those guys that says nobody should go to college. What I am saying is that we need to rethink how we teach our kids. All right. We need to rethink the methodology of how we teach them. And we also need to rethink what we're teaching them and what we expect. And again, I have to say, we have to teach our kids how to think, how to critically analyze data. That's why you need statistics and logic, problem solving, deductive reasoning. We have to teach our kids to be good citizens and to always question. Don't accept everything that's told to you. Teaching our kids to be good American citizens, productive members of society is a key. And I think we are way off track today. In right now, it's September 12th, 2025. we are way off track, in my opinion, in that regard, and it's not getting better. Okay, that's my view on public education. I'm sure there will people have all their other ideas. There's probably some things I missed. There's probably people out there that would vehemently, disagree with me on this. That's fine. That's why we're called America, right? But let's get back and start creating good, informed citizens, not people who could be manipulated and controlled. And that's where I think we're going today. Okay. Episode 52, The Illiterate American, How Our Public Education System Should Be Reformed to Create, as the founders said, a more perfect union. God bless you guys. See you next time. Thanks for listening to The Constitution Solution, one podcast under God. The Constitution is the solution to most of our country's problems. Other episodes can be found on our website at 1787solution.com, YouTube, Rumble, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and most other podcast platforms. I'm your host, Mark DeLuzio. Until next time, may God bless you, may God bless America, and may America bless God.